Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd. Today in our Critter Chat, we're going to talk a little bit about one of my favorite kinds of animals, elephants. Now, elephants are amazing, and if you've never seen a live elephant, I highly encourage you to find an opportunity to do that once this social distancing craziness is over. I've had the opportunity to work in areas around elephants at several zoos, both as a volunteer and as an educator. I was never an elephant keeper, but I have had some pretty amazing interactions with elephants in zoos. I've also been able to see elephants in the wild when I went to Kenya in 2010. And it was an amazing experience, something I will never forget. Watching elephants in the wild, seeing how they move across their landscape, how they interact with one another is truly an amazing experience. But today we're going to talk a little bit about both of the two major species of elephants. Science is still kind of figuring out genetically what elephants exist. For sure there is the African elephant and the Asian elephant. There are some reasons to believe that those may be subdivided into other species, possibly with a third species of elephant being the African forest elephant. It's kind of debated back and forth. We need to do more testing to find out if that's for sure a different species or if it's just a subspecies. Likewise, in the Asian elephant population, there are definitely some subspecies, differences between elephant populations that live in different countries or different areas. And there may be enough differences to separate them into full species. So that's kind of where we stand with species of elephants. But definitely the African elephants, the Asian elephants, they are different from each other. Genetically, they're different. Physically, they look different. They kind of act in very similar ways, but they do have a few behavioral differences as well. The biggest of which is kind of the terrain that they live in. Most elephants in Africa live in kind of a grassland habitat, usually more out in the open with trees kind of on the edges or in some scrubby woodland areas. Elephants in Asia typically live in forests and are usually surrounded by trees most of the time. So that's a huge difference in kind of how they live their day-to-day life. Both species of elephants have some very common things. They both have very large ears, although African elephants' ears are about 3 times the size of Asian elephant ears. If you look closely, African elephant ears are also shaped a bit like the continent of Africa. They used to say that the Asian elephants were called Indian elephants and that their ears are shaped a bit like the country of India, but that takes a lot of creative imagination to make that work. They use their ears in really amazing ways. Their ears are essential for great hearing, which elephants definitely have, but they're also one of the key ways that they keep themselves cool. Those ears have a lot of surface area and they have a lot of blood vessels in them. And so on a hot day, if the elephants fan their ears back and forth, that blows a lot of air over those blood vessels and that helps pull body heat away. And that can help cool the elephants. Likewise, if they get their ears wet or muddy, they can then fan those ears and that helps cool down the blood that's in those ears. And then as that blood moves throughout their body, it's slightly cooler and can cool down their whole body. So it's kind of nature's way of providing built-in radiant cooling for the elephants. It's really remarkable to see, especially on a hot day in Africa, all the elephants were fanning their ears. And in some of the zoo settings where I've been, I've seen that as well. In African elephants, both the males and the females have tusks. Those are those big long bits of ivory that stick out on the sides of their trunks. And those are actually their teeth. Those are their incisors. So those are their front teeth in their mouth. In Asian elephants, typically only the males grow tusk, and some males don't even have tusk. Female Asian elephants usually have much shorter versions called tushes, and most of the time those are not visible unless you're very, very close to the elephant. Another difference is their skin. African elephants are very wrinkly, and even when they're pretty young, they have wrinkly skin. And that is also nature's way of helping them stay a little cooler. More surface area allows more ways for heat to escape their body. And those wrinkles provide little dips and valleys where they can put mud or water that will help keep them cool. Asian elephants, by contrast, have a little bit more smooth skin. Also, their skin is a little more varied in color. Asian elephants, as they get older, start to kind of lose some of the pigment in their skin, and it starts to turn pink. And so an older Asian elephant usually has a decent amount of pink on their face, their ears, their trunk. I posted a photo of my friend Reba, who's an elephant I worked closely with when I worked at the Phoenix Zoo, on the profiles, and she has a lot of pink on the front of her face and on her trunk. Their shape of their back is also a bit different. African elephants are very tall at the head, and then their back kind of dips down and then comes up at their rear end. Asian elephants have a pretty high head, and then their back actually gets higher and is domed. So if you're looking at two elephants side by side and one has a domed back and one has kind of a dip in their back, the dipped back one, or saddleback, is the African elephant. The domed back one would be an Asian elephant. The other big difference, and this is something that's really cool about elephants, they actually have fingers. And their fingers aren't on the ends of their hands, because they don't have hands. Their fingers are on the end of their nose that they use like a hand. That's on their trunk. And African elephants have two fingers on the end of their trunk, and they're able to grab things with them, and they can get something as small as like a sunflower seed up off the ground with their little fingers on their trunk. Asian elephants have one finger, and they're really good with that one finger. They can also pick up something as little as a sunflower seed up off the ground. Now, the other difference, of course, is that African elephants, they live in Africa. Asian elephants live in Asia. They're also a little bit different in how they're classified as far as being endangered. African elephants are listed as being vulnerable. Estimates put them in about 350,000 animals out in the wild, which that sounds like a lot, but they used to have a population of about 12 million. So that's definitely very, very down from what it was maybe 200 years ago. Asian elephants are considered endangered, and the estimated population puts them at about 35,000. So there's only about 1/10 as many Asian elephants as there are African elephants. Both elephants are endangered for the same three big reasons, and those are poaching is probably number one, and that's for those tusks. They don't really have predators except for when they're babies, things like lions or tigers in Asia. Hyenas, maybe some leopards, and crocodiles would go after the babies. It's very rare that anything will try to hunt an adult elephant, although there are some video footage out there of prides of lions when they're really desperate. We'll try to take on an adult elephant. It's usually one that's by itself or maybe hurt, sick, or injured. But yeah, there aren't really natural predators to adult elephants except for humans. Humans, once again, messing up the planet, have caused a lot of problem for elephants, and the biggest of those is poaching for those tusks. And those tusks, they're beautiful. They really are. And unfortunately, a lot of people have decided like, oh, that's so pretty, I want that in my house. And they don't really think it through like how they're getting it. The tusks from an elephant are usually, almost always, cut off of a dead elephant. And that's usually the way that ivory from elephants exists. Now, the ivory has been illegal on a global scale since the 90s. And some countries didn't agree to that ban. One of those biggest countries that recently kind of joined that ban was China, which they joined about 2 years ago. And they made it illegal to trade ivory in their country. Now, with that being said, the United States joined that ban initially in the early 90s, and there are people still trading ivory in the US. And they're doing it illegally, and they're willing to take the chance because they can make some money, and they're not thinking about the animals that are dying so that somebody can have something that looks pretty cool in their house. But that's enough about poaching. Other threats the elephants face are habitat destruction. So as people continue to grow, our population is over 7,790,000,000 people on the earth. As that population continues to go up, we're going to take more land away from other animals that need that space. And as we turn land into places like dams for water, or crops, or cities, or neighborhoods, we push the animals who used to live there out. And that's a big problem with elephants, especially as the population in places where they live continues to grow. The third big problem for elephants is human conflict. Now, as people move into those areas and the elephants are still nearby, if the people start planting trees or gardens to grow food, the elephants are like, hey, there's some free food over here, let's go take a look. And that unfortunately ends with a little fight between elephants and the people. There are some great organizations who are trying to mitigate that conflict. And some of the easy ways that they're doing that is by planting spicy peppers that elephants don't like around the edges of farms. And the elephants, when they come over to check things out, they smell those spicy peppers and then they turn away, because they know that those spicy peppers are not something they really want to eat, that they'll keep their distance. Other places in Africa are using beehives. Elephants don't particularly love a lot of bees, and as they touch a fence that maybe has a beehive near or on it, shakes the bees awake, all the bees come out, the elephants start to turn around instead of continuing on through the farm. So those are some of the big threats, again, for elephants: poaching, habitat destruction, and human conflict. Let's talk a little bit more about how and why an elephant has tusks. So those are their big teeth that grow out of their mouth. African elephants, both the males and females, grow those. They use those for a number of different things, like digging, lifting, or defending themselves. I've also seen an elephant, her name is Misha. She lived at the zoo where I first started my zoo career many years ago. And she was very clever as she would go around her exhibit looking for food. She was kind of the lower ranking, but she was very fast. And she would grab things and stick them up in between her tusk and her trunk to store them for later. I watched her do that one day with a whole pineapple. She picked it up with her trunk, pushed it up between her trunk and her tusk, and then walked around because the other elephants that outranked her were coming behind her. That way she got a really nice treat that she could save for later, but she didn't have to stop and eat it at that point where she felt a little vulnerable. I also saw her do that with a bunch of hay, and I've seen elephants in Africa do that with big tufts of grass, stick them up between their tusks. They also can use those tusks to defend themselves. First day I was in Africa, I saw two younger bull elephants, so they were like teenagers. They were doing some little tussling, fighting, but they were definitely using their tusk to kind of lock with each other and push each other around. When an elephant feels threatened, it may charge people. We had that happen a couple times in Africa, and that scared me pretty good. I was pretty terrified. It was the most scared I ever was during my safari time. But we had a bull elephant that was behind us who got mad and was starting to chase us. And the truck we were driving in had a canvas on the back of it, and I was sitting in the back seat. So if that elephant was going to make contact with the truck, I would have been the one it made contact with first. So I was pretty terrified because it had really long tusks, and those tusks are pretty sharp and pointy, and they can do a lot of damage. But luckily that elephant just kind of charged us and then stopped. And our driver was very good at reassuring us because he knew the secret, and that is if an elephant's going to really charge you to where it's going to make contact, it's going to tuck its trunk all the way back, kind of back underneath it, the rest of its head, because it doesn't want to smash its trunk if it's going to hit you. But pretty interesting things with elephants and the way they use their tusks to defend themselves and push each other around if they need to. Now they also have some other teeth, although they only have 4 other teeth. We call those teeth molars. So if you look in the back of your mouth, you have some pretty big teeth. Those are the teeth you use to crunch a lot of things. They kind of grind up some food, and that's what elephants have too. but our molars are about this big. They're the biggest teeth we have, but they're still pretty small. Elephants' molars are about the size of a brick, and they have 4 of them, one on each side on the top, one on each side on the bottom. And those big molars help grind up their food before they swallow it. And during their lifetime, they usually have 6 sets of teeth, those molars. And as they grow in, they kind of come from the back and push the other teeth out. And they use those molars to eat all kinds of food. So speaking of food and what kind of foods they eat they're complete vegetarians. So they eat a lot of grasses, leaves off of branches and trees. They'll eat the twigs off some of the branches as well, and definitely any fruits or vegetables that they can find. They love all those things. Someone just asked if they eat peanuts. Sure, if peanuts are around, they'll eat peanuts. Is it something they're going to naturally hunt out or find in their natural environment? Probably not. But if they find people growing peanuts, they may raid a peanut field. Peanuts grow underground. Elephants have a good sense of smell. They have some really good tools for digging. They could probably get the peanuts up out of the ground. Definitely something that they could eat. Talking a little bit more about their trunks. So their trunk is both their nose and their upper lip. That upper lip is modified to be what I called a finger earlier. So they can grab things with their lip. But their trunk is kind of an extension of both their nose and their lip. In that trunk, they have about 150,000 different muscles that help move their trunk. They can use it like a hand to pick things up. They can also carry very heavy things or push trees over with it. At a place where I was in Kenya when I went on safari, they had actually put a big fence around a section of the forest to keep the elephants out. And that's because they were hoping that the trees in that area could grow big and strong and provide an important home for the other animals who needed the trees to live. Now the elephants in that area, they wanted to eat the trees. So they pushed a tree down that was right next to the fence. And when the tree fell down, the tree toppled the fence and the elephants got into the forested area. And it took them about 3 weeks to get the elephants back out of the forested area and get the fence back up and repaired. So elephants are very smart, and they know how to use things like their trunk to their advantage. One of my favorite things about elephants is because it's all muscle, there's no bones in their trunk. That muscle takes a lot of time and practice to get used to how it moves. And if you've ever seen a newborn elephant or even a video of an elephant, they don't have control over their trunk yet. So it just kind of dangles like a wet noodle. And especially as they run around, it's just kind of flopping around. They don't know really how to control it at all because they don't really need to. When they're babies, they're drinking milk from their mom, and they do that directly with their mouth. So their trunk isn't really a necessity as they are first born. It's something they kind of get control of by the time they're about a year or 2 years old. They kind of start using their trunk more and stop drinking the milk from their mom. Speaking of baby elephants, elephant moms really do the hard work. They are pregnant, or their gestation is between 20 and 22 months. Yeah, that's a really long time. So they're pregnant for a really long time. That's actually the longest of any animals. So hats off to elephant moms for being pregnant for so long. When the babies are born, they typically weigh between about 200 to, the biggest one I've heard of is about 280 pounds at birth. So that's bigger than me. That's a really heavy baby that she's carried around as it's been growing for almost 2 years. So that's quite the feat an elephant mom has. Speaking of elephants and their size, the biggest elephant ever on record was an African bull elephant. Now, African elephants are a bit bigger than Asian elephants too. So it's no surprise that the biggest one was an African elephant. And the males are also bigger than the females, so that's also not a surprise. But this elephant was enormous. He weighed 24,000 pounds, which is about 12 tons. So that's a very huge animal. He was also 13 feet tall at his shoulder. I'm just over 6 feet tall, so that'd be 2 of me stacked on top plus some to get to the top of his shoulders. So he was a huge boy. Typically elephants are not that big. They're still huge, don't get me wrong. Female elephants, which are called cows, are typically between 6,000 and 8,000 pounds. And bulls typically are between 10,000 and maybe up to 12, maybe 14,000 pounds. So they're quite a bit bigger than the females, than the girls. But yeah, that record breaker was truly an enormous animal. Elephants also have really amazing senses. They have really good sense of smell and really good sense of hearing. They can hear sounds that they make for multiple miles away. I've seen different reports of anywhere from 2 to 5 miles, but they definitely can hear a very far distance, and that's pretty remarkable. That's how they are able to stay in contact with each other over long distances. Speaking of how they roam in the wild, they are very social animals, at least the moms and the babies and the kind of the teenager ones. They live in a herd, and that's usually run by the matriarch, kind of the grandma elephant. She's the boss. She's in charge. She decides where the rest of the family is going to go. And sometimes it's her and maybe her sisters, her daughters, and then all of their kids that kind of live together in a big family. And grandma's in charge, probably because she's most likely the biggest at that point, but she also knows the most. Elephants are very smart, and they learn throughout their life. And that grandma elephant, she's gonna have years and years of experience of where to go to find food, where to go to find water. So when there's something like a fire that burns a big area of their landscape of where they live, she's gonna know another option of where their family can go. If there's a drought and it hasn't rained for a long time, she's gonna know other places to go to find water. She'll remember a lake that she visited when she was a teenager, or a river she went to when she was a young adult. And she's gonna lead her family to find all of those places. So I have another question up here of how long do elephants live? Well, we talked a little bit about their teeth earlier. Their molars, each of those sets of teeth typically last between 8 and 10 years. They typically have 6 sets of teeth. So they live between, I would say, 50, 60 years. Now, some have lived longer. I believe that there was one in a zoo that lived into her 80s. That's remarkable. That's like the person who lives to be 110. It happens, it's not that common. So most elephants are gonna live in their 50s or 60s. Some are gonna be a little less, some are gonna be a little bit more. But those older elephants, they definitely know what's up, and they're able to lead their families over great distances. There's a really fascinating organization. They're actually our shout out for today, called Elephants Without Borders. I'm gonna post their website link up on the profiles later. But Elephants Without Borders has done a lot of research in tracking elephants. They're based out of a country called Botswana, and that country kind of has gone through a lot of extreme weather patterns, droughts, famines when there's not a lot of food, and they've been monitoring the elephants and where they go. And there used to be a big border fence between Botswana and some of its neighboring countries, and the elephants found ways to get to that fence and then turn and go along until that fence stopped, and then they could get to where they needed to go, because they knew that there was food or water beyond that fence, and they've been able to figure out how to navigate around it. What else were we going to talk about? Let's see, there's another question up. How do I know all of this? I'm an animal professional. I've worked for 3 different zoos in various capacities, including education, events, volunteer, and an animal keeper, as also animal commissary preparing the food for animals. I'm also, as the profile is called, an animal nerd, zoo nerd. This is something I've always been very passionate about, and I've spent my life learning. I've also been able to luckily work with some animals in a zoo setting, and I've been able to observe a lot of animals in the wild, and that's a lot of how I've learned. Someone else is saying, where's the saying "an elephant never forgets" comes from? I don't know where that saying comes from, but they are very, very smart. I believe that saying to be mostly true, that they can remember things from very long ago. They can remember people in a zoo setting. They will remember people from a long time ago. And that's something that's pretty amazing too. They're very smart animals. They have to be able to navigate their landscape and move around. Other shout out today is going to be for my good friends over at the San Diego Zoo Global. They're one of the places that I've really loved watching elephants in a zoo setting. They have African elephants at the San Diego Safari Park, and there's a live webcam there. I'll put a link to that up on the profiles, so you can watch along and see some of the elephants. They also have a lot of good information on their page, and they've been involved in some good conservation work. They also have some Asian elephants at the San Diego Zoo, so they do work with both species throughout their organization. But the African elephants at the park are the ones that are on the webcam. I will also post some more photos and more information up on the profiles. I hope that you've enjoyed today's Critter Chat about elephants. I'll be sharing this again on Facebook and on Instagram and also on YouTube, so it can live out on all those platforms. So I hope you guys are all having fun. I hope you're enjoying these Critter Chats. I hope you're learning some things. I'd also like to hear from you. So on the comments, feel free to ask questions. I'll put up a poll later today of what other animals you'd like to learn from. Please take some time to follow along, comment in on that, because I'd like to kind of help you have some fun and learn some things. And together we'll kind of explore some of the different animals of the world. So thank you for tuning in, and until tomorrow, I'll see you then. Enjoy.